You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hi everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Thanks so much for joining us this morning at CBT News. Widely recognized as one of the best operating executives in the United States, Bob Nardelli has grown the sales and profits of a number of multinational corporations. During his 30-year tenure at GE, he quadrupled operating profits for GE Power Systems. As chairman and CEO of the Home Depot, he doubled the size of the company. And as chairman and CEO of Chrysler, he helped save Chrysler and its iconic brands when the American auto industry began to collapse. His firm, Accelerate, which is XLR8, which I love, I think is a great name, investment and advisory, combines his 50-plus years of experience augmenting business performance with a team of professionals that has unparalleled skills in fixing and growing companies. Thank you, Bob, so much for joining us in the studio today.
Jim, it's great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. So I know that I've got a number of dealers that said, Bob Nardelli, I remember Bob Nardelli. He was running Chrysler when I was, back in the day, right?
So, back in the great days, right?
I know. Oh my gosh.
07, 8, 9?
That's right.
Timing was perfect.
How you raised your hand for that gig, I'll never know, right? But you're a very courageous man, right?
Well, it was a great opportunity, as you said in your opening comments, to help restore an iconic brand. And, it was an interesting endeavor at the time. It was like a 125-year-old startup, right? When we bought it out of Daimler, and we had to stand each of the functions up and start all over, whether it was finance, HR, legal, you name it, right?
Sure.
And then we had to really kind of reposition the products. And I was blessed with a great team. And as you know, we reintroduced the Ram, Motor Trend Truck of the Year.
That's right.
We rolled out the Chrysler. We were competing with Rick over at GM with the Camaro.
Sure.
But we got that new Chrysler out in 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
And we repositioned the Jeep, right? And it became, kind of the SUV, the predominant SUV
no question.
for a long time. And they've continued to do that. So
the Jeep brand is very strong.
I want to, tip of the hat to the team, and also to Gettelfinger, who was the president of the UAW at the time. He was marvelous to work with. He had a really good business sense about him. He understood the perils of where we were, and unbelievably cooperative. So I still, have tremendous respect for what he did in helping us save Chrysler.
Sure. Now that you've saved it, and they're struggling a little bit today, to say the least, right, with Stellantis. Talk to us about that. What's your take as you sit back as kind of an armchair quarterback a little bit and say, gee, this is an interesting situation?
Yeah. Well, I think all the automotive companies right now, again, are facing a challenging time.
Yeah.
Certainly here in the U.S. with the interest rates.
Yeah.
And Jim, you're more the expert than I am, but we look at the heavy discounts that they're putting on and incentives.
That's right.
And if you do the math, $3,000-$4,000 trying to offset the incremental cost of the auto loan, right? So that's one challenge they have. The other, when I was there, the car park was averaging about 10 years, and we know now it's about 12.6. And if you look at, I was looking at retail businesses, Home Depot was number one relative to return of assets, return on invested capital for its investors, over 30%. Number two, O'Reilly.
No kidding.
Yeah, amazing, right?
And
so I think it's proof positive of what's happening today. And this mandate, I went through it, right, when I was there. It was called the CAFE standards, right?
That's right.
And again, the government was trying to force consumers to buy what they didn't want to buy.
Yeah.
And everything kind of backed up. The small car.
That's right.
The Cinquecento really didn't go anywhere, the Fiat 300. And now we see the same thing with, instead of an evolution, they were trying to create a revolution on EVs.
That's right.
And we see everything that's backing up on it now, Jim, right?
Well, since you went there, let's talk about that, because I know that there's a number of people in the industry. I'd love to get your take on that. What do you think? What comes to mind when you take a look at the EV landscape and what we've been through, what the OEMs have kind of said, we're going to go in this direction, full steam ahead, although the consumers just don't seem to be there.
Yeah. Well, you and I both know consumers are very selective in the auto industry, and they know what they like and they know what they want. And I think Tesla, as evidenced, has taken a long time to even get a point or 2 points of penetration. And then you had everything flood relative to EVs because of this administration's mandate. And you saw a lot of the SPACs jumping in, like Lordstown and some of the others.
Of course, yeah.
You see billions of dollars now lost. You see billions of dollars on hold. You saw, Jim Farley and Ford, basically, they're not going with the SUV.
Right.
They had over 100 days of the Lightning, the F-150.
That's right. Reeled it all in.
And the battery plants and so on and so forth. So again, you can't force a consumer, you with me, to buy something they don't want. You say, well, look at Apple. Well, that was an innovation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a major innovation in communications. Moving from ICE, internal combustion engine, all the way to pure electric, I think was a revolution instead of an evolution. And now you see the hybrids coming back in. And they're even counting hybrids now as EVs to try to get the penetration up, right?
That's right. Toyota seemed to, all dealers and OEM executives that I talked to kind of point to Toyota and say, these guys got it right, because they said, not so fast. And there were even really some people out there that said, how come Toyota's not jumping on here? They're going to get left behind. When in reality, they're now really leading the industry with some great choices to say, consumers want maybe a plug-in hybrid, a hybrid, and then an EV, or reverse of that. But is that? Do you think that's what has to happen with consumers? We got to walk before we can run. In the EV?
I do, Jim. I mean, first of all, the leadership team over there was on the edge, right? They were very, very critical of what they thought was kind of a stodgy approach to the transformation.
Right.
And now, he's held up as a hero.
That's right.
Of making the right decision. I think what we saw is some of the, U.S. OEMs do a 180, and maybe because of incentives and mandates,
sure.
and, yet another debacle from the administration here. And it used to be range anxiety, and now it's charging anxiety. That's right. And we saw that cold weather and storms in Texas. Yeah. People who make a living with that truck couldn't get out.
That's right.
We now see cold weather really depletes the battery charge. So there's still a lot of technology that has to go into this thing. I complimented Jim Farley. I was watching one of his ads on the NASCAR race on Sunday, and he said, choose your power source. Right. And I thought that was a brilliant move. Sure. We have internal combustion engines, we've got hybrids, and we got pure electric. So let the consumer decide what they want and pull production rather than force production. Right.
Good point. Very good point. I agree with you. With regard, when you talk to the EVs, I mean the OEMs, they'll tell you, they'll point to the government and go, look, don't hate us, don't hate the player, hate the game. And the game is that the government is really mandating this for us to be, in an all EV environment. What's your take on that?
Well, again, as I said, I think that's just one of many debacles coming out of this administration, not to get political, but $7.6 billion allocated for charging. Right. And I think the last I checked, they had like 12 stations put out there.
That's right.
If I have a picture of China's EV charging command center. They got 1.6 million chargers over there. Wow. And they can determine working, not working, charging, not charging.
Yeah, they're on it.
And they're building, basically a new coal plant regularly to handle the load. Sure. And here we're going the other way. We basically surrendered energy independence. Yeah. We're shutting down coal plants. And yet, if you look at not only what we had with EVs, and then you had Bitcoin, and now you got AI. Right. And the demand from those data centers, for example, I think the last time I checked, it's 10 times the energy usage on ChatGPT versus sending an email.
No kidding.
So, so people are going crazy to put in new data centers, demanding energy. And I think what you're going to see is, are these small mobile nuclear reactors that are going to have to supply that going forward.
Yeah, that'll be interesting, right? Yeah. When do you think we would see an all EV environment, or at least the vast majority of the vehicles being sold in the U.S. that will be EVs? Will it ever come to fruition, or is this a complete pipe dream that we might hit 20% and it'll stay there?
Well, if you went to China, you would see that now, basically, right? With BYD. Sure. And interesting, they displaced VW, that was the largest distributor over there. Sure. So in that type of environment, the government can mandate because they're only going to make those available. Right. And they also were forward-looking relative to charging stations, right? So we saw that. I think it's going to take a while here. Yeah. I mean, there was really a revolt. I mean, early on it was, prestigious. It was the right thing to do.
It's kind of a cool thing to do.
Cool thing,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you can go 0 to 60 in like, 3 seconds, 2 point some seconds.
Sure.
And I think that novelty has worn off,
Yeah.
right? I think it's become more of a practical approach to transportation and much more of reliability of transportation. And you look at the number of gas stations in this country compared to EV charging, and of course you're spending 5 minutes versus a few hours.
That's right.
So I think time has become one of the most precious. I found that at Home Depot.
Yeah.
It used to be when they first started, you wanted the consumer to get lost in the store,
Right.
so that they would buy more. Now the consumer wants in and out, right?
Yes.
So that's why we did way signs and we did a lot of different things in aisles. And
Sure.
of course, the online thing has taken off.
Yeah.
So I think it's a trend out there, Jim, if my point of view on it.
There's experts out there that echo what you're saying in terms of the charging stations and such. And however, the affordability factor also is a big one, right? That the fact that the average price of a new car is almost $50,000 now, and it's almost $60,000 if you're looking at EVs. Do you think if they get that under control, that meaning the affordability factor and also the charging stations nationwide, the infrastructure is there, that will change the consumer's habits for EVs in a big way?
I think the other thing I don't want to lose sight of is at the end of a period of time, you have a carcass.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, the expected life with normal is what, about 6 or 7 years?
Yeah.
And at that point, you basically have a carcass, as opposed to, my dad always taught me, Bob, don't buy a new car until it's 100,000 or 10 years old. and I still follow that today, to be honest with you. But it will happen.
Yeah.
But you can't force it.
Right.
It has to be an evolution, not a revolution, as I
Right.
said. And it has to overcome some of those, whether they're psychological or real obstacles to convert. But it will happen eventually, but not at the rate that this administration was mandating.
Right, right. So, and not to get too political, but it's almost impossible to not get too political today, right? Because people are, it drives so much of our economy, who's sitting in the Oval Office. Having said that, you've got Trump now that is kind of cozying up to Elon Musk. So that makes, they say politics makes strange bedfellows, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that's a pretty strange bedfellow right there.
Well, it's you would not have predicted that.
No.
But it is interesting, I guess, right after the attempted assassination.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he's fulfilled it, but it was like $35 million a month kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think, this is just my thought, but since he had such a first mover advantage, he probably is okay with the pullback from the administration forcing this, because he is, he's providing the charging. He made a very intelligent decision to allow for his chargers to be used on other vehicles, right? So he'll now control the grid application, and he'll have purchasing power, right? Power purchasing agreements with the utilities. So I think, look, he's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
Very smart guy. So let's not see a head fake by his support of Trump. There are definitely business reasons there, I think, Jim.
That's right. There's satellites to be shot up, right, that benefit the government, and he probably wants some of those dollars. So it's not just all about EVs or Tesla, right?
No, he's brilliant, and he's got broad tentacles in a lot of businesses.
Yeah, I see where the stock for Truth Social came down ever since Trump got back on to X.
Yes.
So it was like, well, wait a minute, what are we doing here?
Well, if somebody gave me $35 million a month, I'd probably
That's
jump.
Exactly right.
I'd probably jump too, Jim.
That's right. That's right. So, which administration do you think would be the best case scenario for the auto industry? I mean, I could probably venture a guess, but what?
Yeah. Well, clearly, if the current administration stays in office, then I don't think we'll see much of a change relative to where you and I have been discussing it.
Sure.
I think if there's a new administration there, some of the things about saving the auto industry, for example, whether you believe in it or not, putting some heavy tariffs on imports, whether it's coming from China, whether it's coming from Mexico, until he wants to get the border under control, and he used that technique before.
Right.
So you'd have to say that, at least in principle, but words are only measured in actions, right? Really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure.
So if in fact if his administration does what he says he's going to do, you would think it would have favorable impact on the auto industry.
Right.
My guess is the dealers would say the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I've lived with the dealers in the toughest of times,
Yeah,
right?
that's
7,
for
8,
sure.
9, and,
Yeah, wow.
and I have nothing but the utmost respect for
Yeah.
what they do and the value that they bring to the auto industry.
Right.
Right? Because they're the ones on the front line.
Yeah.
They've got their capital invested.
Oh yeah. All
They've got their
entrepreneurs.
floor plan. They got all of those things. So,
That's right.
so I would hope that we could, whatever administration gets in there, I would hope that we would keep those that viability out there for it.
Yeah, for sure. Many dealers that I talk to are concerned about the next 6 to 12 months. They've seen the industry come back down to pre-COVID levels, and maybe obviously even under pre-COVID levels. One dealer said it's not 2019, it's not even 2018. So I'm having a hard time moving some of my iron here. And many dealers point to interest rates.
Yes.
Consumers are feeling that anxiety over rates. Dealers are feeling the pinch because of floor plan and such. So I know there's a lot to unpack there. What has to happen in order for rates to change? And then if they do, how much of an impact does that have?
Yeah.
What do you think the Fed's going to do in this next go-around?
Well, I think the news of yesterday, as you and I were talking about, the 818,000 job adjustment, it's interesting the timing of when the government got honest, right?
That's right.
Because as you and I discussed, I follow that very, very closely. Last month was 125,000. But typically when you look at these bigger numbers, and you always ask the second question, I always do. So if it's 250,000 jobs, where were the jobs?
Yeah.
Well, one particular month was, I think it was Supercut, what had created the most jobs, the haircut place. And then all of 23, the second largest employer in the country was the government, right? Yeah. And so there's not really a good return on invested capital there.
No.
Right? 80,000 new IRS doesn't create a lot of jobs.
No.
It
relates to a lot of anxiety.
A lot of anxiety for sure. But so I really think what has to happen, you got 1.1 trillion in credit card debt. So the consumer has carried this economy on their back for a period of time. And even if they reduce the rates, I think it's going to take a while, right? For that whole bubble of interest rates and debt to move through the system. Right. So you heard the job adjustment. That'll take unemployment and people that are applying for credits and tax credits, unemployment and so forth. So what happens is, the Fed's meeting this week, right? Right. And so where maybe September was going to be a quarter, maybe it'll be a half now. They may feel some pressure to move a little faster. Typically October. Because
of the election year that we're in, are you saying?
Maybe, don't you think? and so I think, this administration might what's the worst of two evils? Announce 818,000 job adjustment that then may take the interest rate down sooner, or let the interest rate stay higher. I think
that's a foregone conclusion, right?
Yeah, I think the test is pretty easy. That may not, if it's quarter to half, it's not going to move the needle significantly other than psychologically, right? Yeah. And so they do
the perception of it all.
Yes. Yeah. So they do September. Typically, they would not have done October because they would have gotten labeled preference towards policy administration. So I think they may do something though. And then we'll see something happen into 2025. But I think the economy has a lot more load on it than we all feel. And so I think it's going to take a while for it. Look, I was, I'm old enough to remember the Jimmy Carter thing with wages frozen, price freezing, some of the things.
Inflation, rates.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
You're too young, but I remember these gas lines, right? Yep. And so we got to be really careful here when one administration's talking about putting, freeze on prices. And,
that's right.
And just to elaborate one more, you can't start at the end. You can't go to the grocery store and freeze prices. You need to start with what's the chemicals being used to generate the feed for chickens, the transportation of, the utilities of, all the things.
Otherwise you'll put these people out of work.
Yeah, because freezing this just puts pressure upstream, if you will, on the supply chain, and that just doesn't work. Right. It does not work. History will repeat itself if we go down that path. Right. I think.
Sure. One of the things that the auto industry is struggling with is affordability. We touched on it a little while ago. Where does all of this go? We're talking about the price of an average new car is just under $50,000. This has got real implications, does it not? I mean, as a former chairman and CEO of Chrysler, you got to be shaking your head going, oh my God. Yeah. What was the average price of a car back in 2007?
What was it, 30-some thousand, right?
Yeah, it was probably even less than that back then. But
well, we had predominant brands.
Yeah, well, there you go. Sorry about that.
No.
But what are you thinking when you hear about a vehicle that expensive?
Here's what I experienced today. I'm still very active in both Fortune 500, middle markets, sure. And the 9.1% is embedded in our cost of living today. Yeah. Just because inflation has come down to 3.1, that 9.1 is we're still choking on it.
That's right.
So the UAW, 40% wage increases. Yeah. And look, I'm all for cost of living. Yeah. They have to earn a fair living, right, for their families. We all want that. So I don't begrudge it, except that once that's embedded in there, so what do you have to do then? Then you have to start laying other people off. Right. You've got to cut back on R&D. Right. Transportation costs, freight costs. We were paying like $8,000 for a container, right? And so that I had predicted on one of the networks that we'd go to 10, and the anchor thought, oh, Bob, but we got to 9.1, so I was pretty close there.
You're pretty good at this.
Well, I don't know if I'm good, but I'm lucky, I guess. Right. But seriously, I'm still getting price increases on highly engineered materials, titanium and so forth for aerospace industry. Sure. So a lot of that is already embedded, and a lot of it is still trickling in because it can, right? People are using dynamic pricing techniques out there, and they're pushing until somebody says no. Yeah. Now, we see it on some of the retail, like fast food. We're seeing a pullback, but that's only going to work if it works its way back up the supply chain. Right. Just for them to take the hit, if groceries at 1.6 margin rates, that's pretty thin to live on and work off of, right? Yeah. When you think about rent and capital costs and so on and so forth. So I think we have to be very careful. We're at a very fragile period in the back half of this year and going into 25, in my opinion. Yeah, no question about it. What's your take on the industry moving forward? And what I mean by that is that we see China that's coming in saying we can provide a very low cost EV, into the U.S. market. Yeah. We touched a little bit on it about putting tariffs on those vehicles. Although there's another school of thought that says that's no more than just a tax on the consumer that's going to buy that car. Or there's others that say, well, that's just going to put the automakers in the U.S. at an advantage to either maintain high prices and charge what they want because of the competition being so high. Yeah. Well, let's hope. The $25,000 for first home buyers is already rumbling through the system of, well, we'll just charge $25,000 more. Exactly. Right? Yeah. Right. And so we're already seeing that. We need to use prudent judgment here. And if we want to try to salvage this economy, right? So the auto industry would be prudent not to, just because the tariffs are there, and therefore I can raise these prices. I think that would be a mistake. Yeah. Because the consumer is going to choke. Right. I mean, they may not want EVs, but they also have interest rates and they got standard of living, cost of living. Sure. And so I would hope that they wouldn't take advantage of that. And because it would be a very short-term blip. Right. And then all of a sudden you're going to back up. Dealers are going to back up. Yep. And I know the dealers quite well, they're the best at, well, you gave me this much on the hood, but now if you want me to order, I can't order because my lot's full, so you got to give me another $5,000 to move these things, right? So you've been through this. Of course. It's the game you play. They're survivors. They're survivors, aren't they? The stair-step programs out there and the whole deal. It's the average consumer has no idea. No, they don't. They really don't. What's going on behind the curtain. I have sold many cars on the 30th day of the month at a $5,000 loss because that was the unit I needed to roll to make it retro to the first car that I sold to get all that money back, right? Listen, we're coming up. If you ever wanted to buy a vehicle, right, you agree with me.
Yeah.
It's September, end of month.
That's right.
Because they're going to start getting flooded with 25s,
Yeah.
and they got to move those 24s.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Are we going to be okay in the auto industry, do you think, moving forward? Do you think that with all the pressures that the industry has on it between EVs and rates and, the SAR is not what it was in 2019, although, we're only about 1.5 million cars off.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, we went from 17.6, if I remember, down to about 9.6 or 10.
Yeah, that's when you were out there with
we had to take a break even. We had to get our break even down to a SAR of 10.
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, we had to furlough 35,000 families.
Yeah.
I don't say employees because it's a family when you do that.
Sure.
We had to close factories. We had to basically stop R&D. We had to stop a lot of mid-year facelifts and so forth just to survive. So, look, the auto industry is one of the key pillars in our economy. And so I'm hopeful that it survives. I'm hopeful that they evolve on technology. And look, even during the CAFE standards, we voluntarily did a lot of things, right? We went to electric transmissions and accelerators and this and that to take the horsepower, the drag on the horsepower to improve the efficiency, fuel efficiency. Right. So we did a lot of things voluntarily because we want to, listen, it's corporate America, right? Yeah. We hire a lot of Americans.
Sure.
And so we're as much invested as anybody in making sure there's sustainability and continuity there.
Right. Speaking of inventory levels, a lot of dealers right now are saying, whoa, we're turning cars away. We're turning them down, which dealers typically don't want to do. They don't want to turn inventory away. This was not the case just 24 months ago, 24 short months ago, when you get every car that you could get and it's going to sell. But now they're saying, hey, I'm good. I'm at a 120-day supply, and these manufacturers just keep building and keep sending them to dealers. As a former OEM, it looks as though they didn't learn from the COVID situation where we had less vehicles available on the lot, which brought up the gross profits. And every dealer I talked to during that time would say, geez, if they could just get to like a 30-day, maybe a 40-day supply, it makes for a better value to the consumer on that car. It makes for a better, healthier dealer and gross profit. And the OEM's going to make more money because they're not having to put so much on incentives to move distressed merchandise. Yeah. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I'll share a little inside baseball on this. So when I was at Chrysler, it was interesting. Usually the plants, the manufacturing guy was determining the production volume. Why? Well, because I got to absorb my overhead.
Right.
And I use my military term, that's a you problem, not a me problem, right? And so
that's right.
We had a little bit of cover of what was going on during that period.
Right.
So we were adamant about adjusting production, right, based upon consumer pull, not OEM push. Yeah. Right. And whether it was at Home Depot or GE or wherever, I learned pretty quickly. The consumer at the end of the day is going to make the decision, no matter what we do. Now, maybe that's not true for the Apple iPhone, because somehow, but that's a whole different story.
It is.
That's a different story. But I hope that at least the U.S. OEMs understand and learn from where we've been, how we had to dig out, and sometimes we forget, what we had to learn back then.
I know.
And so I hope they moderate that.
Right.
And we saw, you mentioned early on, Stellantis, right?
Yeah.
Took 2,500 out, took production down already.
That's right. They're in a very, very tough situation. Every Stellantis dealer I talk to is this is tough. Even the advisors and brokers in the business that we have on CBT every week will say, I'm not getting any calls on Stellantis dealerships. Yeah. So Carlos is, I have a tremendous respect for him. I got to know him quite well when we were doing a deal with Nissan. When Carlos Ghosn was there and Carlos Strabati was number two. Yeah. And he's a pretty cost-conscious, very smart guy. Yeah. And I think that's why he made this decision sooner than later. Because once you get him, when you get them parked in the lot, right? Yeah. And it's hard to get those things moved. I mean, you really, no question.
We were doing some crazy things at Chrysler where, if you want the cars, you got to take the trucks. Right. Yeah. And we would have to bundle those things to try to get them moved. And I appreciate what the dealers did during that period of time. Yeah. And also the rental car organization.
Yeah, the fleets.
They were very helpful to me, and they understood the pressure we were under and trying to survive. So,
right.
I can only speak highly of them, but again, we got to make sure we don't repeat what got us into trouble the last time, Jim.
Yeah. So getting back to the what we just talked about in terms of the inventories, you're saying that the OEMs, if I hear this correctly, the OEMs are kind of a little bit at the mercy of the unions that have got to keep those lines moving.
Yeah. Well, because the cost continues, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because of the job banks and some of the other things.
Sure.
And, we were, again, with Gettofinger, we were able to make some major milestone changes there where you couldn't turn down a job in perpetuity. 3 strikes and you were out, right? And it sounds harsh, but you can't sit in the break room and get almost a full pay for not contributing.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And so that was just one of the changes that we were able to make. And so I hope the OEMs, kind of reflect on what's the right thing to do for the industry and try to make the right decisions.
Yeah, no question about it. Your forecast for the end of the year. We're going through this crazy election season, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. It's crazy on both sides. There's enough going on out there. We're going to finish the year strong, you think?
Not so much.
Okay.
I think, the chip makers will be strong. So there's always going to be that Magnificent Seven, and there's going to be pockets. But, you saw today where, Marvin over at Lowe's, the chairman CEO of Lowe's, took his forecast down. My good friend Ted Decker took his down, made numbers, but taking it down. So you're seeing a lot of these, retail operations pulling back for the balance of the year forecast.
Right.
And so I think it sends a little bit of a wave out there, a little bit of a shock wave. As I said before, the fault lines in our economy are getting pressure checked right now.
Right.
And whoever goes into that White House, I fear is going to be hit with a wrecking ball trying to get this thing back on track.
Really?
When you look at trillions of dollars of spending and debt, and basically, if you're honest, really haven't, resulted in this kind of success that they thought they were going to have.
Sure.
So we got trillions of dollars in, 3 or 4 of those big packages that came out. And if you look at our debt ratio right now, it's concerning to me.
Sure.
At any level. I had a company where we were paying $2 million in interest, and because we had, an adjustable rate, that thing popped up to $10 million. So 100% of the free cash flow is going to pay interest.
Right.
And I don't think our company is any different than the Fed's paying interest, right?
Of course.
On some of the things they're doing. So
no question.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it doesn't have a downward pressure on us, but I fear that the back half of this year we're going to see some pressure points.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of middle market companies, lower middle market companies, family owned, saying, I don't want to go through this again.
Yeah.
I went through it 7, 8, 9. I went through it with COVID.
Yep.
And my cash, I'm going to take my cash and go.
Yeah. In fact, there's been a number of dealers and or groups, I should say, that have been sold, family-run groups that have been sold over the last few years for that very reason.
Yes.
Between COVID and all of the other things that retail automotive has been faced with, they just, you know what, I'm good.
Yeah.
Let somebody else take the ball and run.
I
with it,
recovered from COVID. I managed to hold my breath and get through it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go through this again.
No.
And it's unfortunate because they're probably second, third generations in some cases.
Yeah.
So it's an emotional decision for a lot of these dealers.
Very
of course.
much so. Very much
and,
so. Yeah.
Look, they have a wonderful place in the community. They're sponsoring the baseball teams, and they have a lot of stature, and
That's right.
they do a lot of philanthropic work. So I hope that's not the case because I think a strong dealer network is it's the bones of an OEM.
Yeah,
really,
for sure.
It's the bones.
For sure. Jamie Dimon recently said that he feels as though a recession it could still be just lurking right around the corner. Would you agree with that?
Jamie and I have been friends for a long time.
Yeah.
And when he speaks, I listen, right? And he's always been half full. He's always been very optimistic. So when he says something like that, which I heard,
right, takes a lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
it takes a lot because
read between the lines.
He's always upbeat. He's positive. When you look at what he's done in conjunction in Detroit, he was here a couple of months ago opening up new branches. I mean, he's done a marvelous job with J.P. Morgan Chase, and So there's our next Secretary of Treasury right there.
Yeah, I agree. Man, that would be fantastic. Mr. Bob Nardelli, thank you so much. This has been a real treat. I know that our dealer viewers will get a lot out of your visit with us here today. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, and I appreciate all you're doing for the automotive industry.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words. Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.